Hello everyone and welcome to yet another Pensy Fan 19 catalog review. I know this is slightly late when compared to when the catalog first came out, but it's been a long day at work. My train back home got delayed by a lot. If you notice the time in the bottom right, it is kind of late at night, but by golly, I'll be doing a catalog review one way or another. Better late than never, because this is one of just 2 times in the year where we get to review the latest that Lionel has to offer. So this time we're doing the Volume 2 catalog, which is usually released around the middle of July, and I don't want to say not as great as Volume 1, but it's usually an extra detail or an extra amount of new molds, new train sets, as well as a handful of items that were released in previous catalogs. It's like a little addition of new things that are added for the year that usually can't really fit into Volume 1, because Volume 1 is usually the larger of the two. And after seeing the most recent Volume 1 from Lionel, to the point where I even called it Lionel's best catalog in a while, this catalog has some pretty big shoes to fill. But right off the bat, we can see that they're really, and I do mean really, leaning heavily on the Polar Express 20th anniversary tradition for this year. Because let's be honest, it is the one brand that definitely saved Lionel and model railroading as a whole. Almost everyone has at least an O-gauge model or O-gauge train set of the Polar Express set. And seeing how the franchise is turning 20 years old, they're doing a lot of stuff to celebrate that. So right off the bat, you can see the observation car in this cover. It looks a little bit closer to O scale, namely with the 3 axles on the coach, as well as how the windows are higher when compared to the rest of the coach car, which looks a little bit more accurate to the observation car that was used in the film, with the windows being higher up. We also have Believe written in the gold dust, the ticket being turned, as well as the 2024 catalog, Volume 2, with the Polar Express 20th anniversary logo right on the top left. It's all about the Polar Express for Lionel, but let's see what else they have to offer. Lionel usually has a handful of new molds for Volume 2, so let's get right into it. Once again, we have the O Scale, O Traditional, and Halloween. Really odd that they don't have a section for Christmas despite Polar Express. 20th anniversary logo, the Blue Polar Express, as we reviewed in the previous catalog. And starting off, we have a Norfolk and Western Y6, number 2174. Quite a popular steam engine. Now, I don't know the history too much about some of these steam excursion engines. I tend to focus more on the lesser known and obscure stuff. But I hear that this is a pretty big engine in terms of the Preservation Society. I think this was the one that got scrapped, but is pretty close to the other Y6 that's currently preserved in Virginia. It's one of those two, but it's a pretty nice addition. What also catches my eye in the top left is the Lionel Line's O-Scale coach. It seems to be following a trend that Lionel is taking lately in terms of not only creating fantasy liveries in O-Scale, but also taking a lot of post-war classics and turning them into O-Scale, which makes it quite nice, actually. It's nice to see a high-end or a high rendition version of a classic Lionel steam engine, coach car in this case. I remember some ALCO FAs were taken from post-war sets and turned into O-Scale recently. So it'll be very interesting to see what Lionel has to offer in terms of upscaling some O-Scale sets. Maybe this could be a O-Scale train set of sorts. Maybe a scale recreation of the original. But until then, we have... Ooh, this looks pretty nice. Opening up with a Conrail GG1, number 4800 Old Rivets, which has a slightly more boxy appearance compared to the more traditional GG1. And they also have the Vision Line text and the background in blue to almost perfectly match with Conrail. So this might be our first mold of the catalog. Let me see if that's right. Yep. Now we start. You see, this is what I like about Lionel recently, especially when it comes to catalogs. So not only do they have pretty popular classes like the GG1, but they start off and they feature a lot of lesser known liveries that these engines worn right up front. Despite being named Pensy Fan, I'm not exactly sure of the name of this particular paint scheme, but it was applied to a handful of GG1s for a brief amount of time. I want to say during some time in the 1950s. And the coaches down here definitely match the mid to late 50s era of the Pennsy, where it focuses more on stainless steel and a small line of brown going across the top. And this livery was likely made to mostly coincide with the coaches that are being used on the Northeast Corridor at the time. But once again, it's great to see the GG1 being offered once again by Lionel, especially with all the attention to detail as per usual. And speaking of as per usual, if you want to read the paragraphs or look at some of the prices, feel free to pause the video and to read some of the stuff. For example, Lionel wants to charge a grand total of $1,700 for this GG1. A little bit on the pricey side, but I would say it's well worth it for the amount of detail that's being put into the engine, especially when it comes to the tooling for something this large. So let's see what else they have in terms of GG1s. Once again, we have the classic Tuscan red and gold livery of the Pennsy. I'm not sure if the lettering that was used on the Pennsy is accurate to the real life counterpart. It looks a bit big in my opinion, but maybe that's some sort of rendering error, or maybe the lettering was that large at that point. I'm not entirely sure. What also catches my eye is the number 4877. This was one of the last GG1s in revenue service. And not only that, but this was also one of a handful of GG1s to be repainted into its original livery during the late 70s and early 80s when it ran for Amtrak and New Jersey Transit. And it sets a debate as to, is this considered the first Hertiage unit? Because even though the engine originally wore the paint scheme, it's wearing a paint scheme of a previous railroad that at the time didn't exist. So a lot of people go back and forth as to whether this particular engine is a Hertiage unit or not. And what also catches my eye are the Pennsylvania 18-foot coaches over here. Now, these look like the more traditional Pullman cars, but I don't know if they were painted in the more contemporary or the later brown and silver livery that the Bud coaches down here were painted in as well. So that's a pretty interesting development for the Pennsy that I have to look into, because this I haven't heard of. Up next, we have two more schemes for the Pennsy. We have classic Brunswick green and yellow, along with a earlier variant of the Pennsy livery. Once again, Lionel hitting it right on the nail when it comes to lesser known paint schemes for pretty popular engines. And they also changed up the coaches from Bud to Tuscan Red, which I believe these are Pullman, if I remember correctly. And another thing that's interesting is that these are listed as Spirit of St. Louis, whereas the previous ones were listed as aluminum station sounds. Nothing in particular, so yeah, sorry about that. All new product apparently. So once again, I think this was probably the first livery or the first variant of the GG1 livery that was applied to any engine like this. So great job once again for accuracy. And of course, what's a Pennsy GG1 without the Penn Central liveries? And again, with attention to detail, not only do you have the Penn Central liveries for the original red and white as well as white, but if you notice the air intakes on the top right, or at least on the outermost edges of the Penn Central GG1s, you'll notice that it's not present with the Pennsy GG1s. Actually, as a matter of fact, it's not present with any of them. You can see the ventilation down here is down towards the bottom instead of on the top. So these GG1s that ran for Penn Central were post-rebuild. So it's small details like that that really makes Lionel stand out when it comes to O-scale models like this. And likewise, all the coaches down here have been painted to just be silver as well as silver and black to represent Penn Central respectively. I apologize if I'm going a little quick with some of these models. I'm trying to see if I can keep it a little bit shorter when compared to Volume 1, and also due to the fact that at the time of recording, it's 1 o'clock in the morning after a pretty long day, but I definitely want to get this catalog review in some way or the other. Ooh, this is interesting. So not only do we have the once again, a very lesser known livery on the GG1. It seems to be a variant of either the Penn Central or probably the Amtrak GG1 because of the lettering, or more namely the font style of the numbering 921. But it also has the United States Saving Bonds stamp that was put on the side. I don't know the history behind this particular engine offhand, but I do remember seeing it in a handful of old videos and photos of GG1 service along the Northeast Corridor, namely when it ran for Amtrak. And fittingly, there are a bunch of Rainbow era coaches to perfectly fit with the time period. Some of them are in Amtrak Phase 2, some of them are in their respective railroads, namely from railroads up along the former Burlington Northern. So you have Great Northern, Northern Pacific, and you also have some stuff that's from the West Coast, such as Union Pacific and Santa Fe. So it's great to see Amtrak being thrown into this mix as well. We have a lot of pages based on the GG1, and it's even officially licensed by Amtrak, namely for the coaches. So that's a cool little fun fact too. And of course, we have the Amtrak GG1. This is based on an earlier variant, a later variant of the Pennsy solid yellow line, which was originally applied to save money because it's easier to paint one line when compared to several. And instead of painting it into Penn Central colors, it was just patched over and now patched over with Amtrak lettering. Once again, officially Amtrak licensed, but this time every coach in the set, or at least every coach that's being offered here, is part of Phase 2. So that's a nice little feat as well. I'm not really sure why Lionel offered a. I don't know if this is supposed to be a set or not, so maybe it could be easily mixed and matched with the Rainbow era coaches that were shown earlier. But I'm not sure if you had Amtrak GG1s that were patched units carrying fully Phase 2 liveries. Most Amtrak GG1s might have had the Phase 1 variant of the livery applied if the rest of the coaches were painted in Phase 1 as well. Now we have the American Railroads livery for the GG1. This was applied to a handful, or at least in this particular case, number 4902, to help pull a excursion train for the 100th anniversary of the Golden Spike from, I forget where it started from offhand, but it went to basically the closest town to Promontory Summit, Utah, to once again celebrate the centennial of the event. So I've seen the livery before, but I'm kind of surprised that they paired it with the train set that was also painted in a similar livery, because occasionally you'll see a photo of, I think it was nickel plate 759, that was painted in a similar paint scheme, pulling the same coaches. But there's not too much footage of the GG1 pulling this particular train, because I think they kept the GG1 in this AR livery well after the excursion, if I remember correctly. And of course, we have a Pennsy freight set. We have the Brunswick Green with a handful of assorted freight cars, some Caboose variants over here, and we also have another original GG1 livery, once again on old rivets, number 4800. As you can see, they have a different shape for this particular GG1 prototype, as they showcased with the Conrail unit earlier on. And let's see if it's also on. Now that's a nice combo. The original GG1 in Pennsy Brunswick Green, as well as the Lionel Lines coaches themselves, which I think is the molding for this one different when compared to the other GG1s. I feel like something's different. Maybe it's the angle that this is taken, maybe it's the detail on the nose. Most notably with the handrails, I want to say. Maybe it's just me, but this is a good way to bring back a classic set. A classic GG1 engine, which definitely appears to be the mold of the catalog. Every catalog, Lionel always has at least one or two molds that they apply all of these different liveries for. And for Volume 2, it's usually just one mold. And that mold is definitely the GG1. And what a great class of engines to choose to base a lot of these paint schemes off of, to do all these models off of, and to even restore original train sets like this. I don't know the exact name or the exact model number of several Lionel post-war train sets, but these Lionel Lines coaches are iconic in their own right, because not only would they be seen behind GG1s, but they would also be seen behind the classic New York Central, or in this case, Lionel Lines Hudson. And it's a pretty big staple of Lionel passenger train sets, not only because they were constantly found in a lot of post-war models, but they also represent what your average passenger car looks like in the pre-war years, before you had Pullman and Budd creating stainless steel cars. And I think these are most notable because the extended roof on the top was the way they took in air, because they didn't have air conditioning back then. But when you think of a passenger car in the US before the 1930s, this is the kind of car that usually comes into mind. And Lionel was trying to capture that image with these iconic red coaches. And you haven't really seen them around all that much ever since the post-war era. So it's a great way to bring it back behind a very incredible engine class. Next, we have another Pennsylvania variant for the GG1, this time with different numberings, as well as completely solid stainless steel coaches, this time saying Lionel Lines instead of Pennsylvania. Next, we have a Pennsy REA coach, a baggage car, Penn Central, MOW, PRR. Pennsylvania, I think Penn Central again, REA, PRR. And right after that, we go on to the diesel locomotive. Very unusually, no steam engines offered by Legacy. I mean, it's volume 2, so it's not going to be as large, but I'm pretty surprised that they didn't offer anything for steam at all. I mean, it was only the GG1. They had a lot of great GG1 models, but yeah, I've never seen that before, where they just completely skip over steam. And freight cars for that matter. Maybe they'll cover freight cars later on, but who's to say? That's to be determined right after this. First, we start off with the SD70 Ace, a classic EMD engine, one of the more modern products built by EMD. Loved by foamers because, let's face it, they're not GEVOs. It's something a little bit different on the rails. And starting off, we have 3 Heritage units that are owned by Norfolk Southern in real life, namely Penn Central, likely a homage to all the GG1s that they showed earlier, as well as the Reading lines for B-line service, as well as the Savannah and Atlanta. So, the thing that just in general, the thing that I appreciate about the Savannah and Atlanta Heritage unit in general is that it's representing a pretty iconic livery of the Southern. With Norfolk Southern, they were torn between the Southern Crescent livery, which is on 8098, and the Southern Tuxedo livery, which is seen on 1065. But since the Savannah and Atlanta was a subsidiary of the Southern before being absorbed into Norfolk Southern, many of their diesels shared the same tuxedo livery as most of the Southern engines. So they still found a way to incorporate the iconic Southern tuxedo livery, even if through a subsidiary railroad. So it's a great way to have both famous liveries for the railroad incorporated, because I can see how you could choose different liveries for every other heritage unit for Norfolk Southern, but I feel for the 2 railroads that actually made Norfolk Southern, namely the Norfolk and Western and the Southern Railway, I feel like those 2 railways in particular should get some sort of special recognition by the current owner. Up next, we have some more SD70 Aces, this time including the Norfolk Southern Heritage units for Wabash and Virginia, as well as a recently painted Ferromex SD70 Ace. It's not too often that you see any O-gauge models of any Ferromex equipment, especially in the more recent livery like this one over here. So, good job, Lionel. Next, we have the Canadian National Grand Trunk Western Heritage Unit, which I believe people said that CN specifically chose the SD70M-2, the SD70M-2, which has some different internal components when compared to the ACE, but they chose this one in particular for the Grand Trunk Heritage Unit to respect the fact, or at least to pay tribute to the fact that the Grand Trunk in real life never rostered any GEs. I mean, they were still using 4-axle and 6-axle EMD Jeeps and SD40s as late as the late 90s. So it shows a lot of EMD loyalty by the Grand Trunk, and that's what Canadian National was trying to highlight with this particular heritage unit. Other than that, we have the Maine Northern Railroad, who I believe purchased these engines secondhand from another Class 1. I forget who offhand. And then similar situation here with the Susquehanna purchasing these SD70M-2 secondhand, I believe from Norfolk Southern. for these particular units. And then, unrelated, off to the right, we have the Canadian National Sea Liner. Now, there are various variants of the sea liners that had different amounts of axles and different horsepower based on their use, I guess. But starting off, we just have a simple 4-axle sea liner. But with this particular design, it looks like it's a little bit further away from completion, since this looks like it's just concept art as of now, or just a sketch. It's not too often that you see Lionel produce a sketch like this, especially for an official catalog release. But I guess they just wanted to get the word out there sooner than later, even if it'll be delivered much, much later when compared to something that has a more complete rendering like this. It looks like they're making a lot more sea liners for some pretty iconic railroads, namely Canadian Pacific, who I believe has the last remaining sea liner in existence. It's painted in a Canadian Pacific livery just like this one. And they also have some B units to go with the sea liner engine as well. We also have the Milwaukee Road, New York Central. Some of the shading might be a little bit off for the sea liners here, as well as the Pennsylvania down here. Pretty good collection in general, and a great way to represent these sea liners. Now we have the ALCO PAs, another somewhat underrated passenger engine. Well, the sea liners weren't really passenger, but we have another underrated class of diesel engines being offered by Lionel, most notably the iconic Santa Fe and Erie, as well as the lesser-known New Haven, Southern, and Southern Pacific. Now, I have a question for all of you Southern fans listening. I mean, I could go on to Google and try to research this on my own, but were any of the Southern PAs in tuxedo black? Because whenever I see a photo of the Southern PA specifically, they're almost always in crescent green. And I feel like the E8s and specifically the ALCO PAs are the only two diesel classes, and maybe some RS3s, but the only two mainline diesel classes that were given the Southern tuxedo livery, the Southern Crescent livery in green and white, and everything else was just painted in black and white for the tuxedo. So I don't know how many of these PAs were given the tuxedo livery. So once again, good job at Lionel for recognizing a lesser-known livery. If there were any PAs in the tuxedo, if they were all in crescent, then I guess it's a pretty clever fantasy livery. But I'm going to leave that for everyone in the comments to decide. And of course, we have the classic nickel plate road PAs based on numbers 184 and 185 with some pretty nice coaches to go with them. Now, these two are particularly famous in recent times since I don't know the number offhand, but one of the nickel plate PAs was recently purchased from the Oregon State Railway Museum, I believe, and was shipped over to the Delaware Lackawanna Railroad in Scranton for restoration of sorts. So, nice sea Lionel keeping up to the times as well, and by highlighting these particular events by making models instead engines. And then we go on to Halloween, starting off with the Halloween PA. I can kind of see what they're going for with this one, because you can kind of see a war bonnet resemblance in here, because they're trying to see if they could. I'm really surprised they didn't include a Delaware and Hudson ALCO PA, especially if they already include the Santa Fe ones. But they kind of had that war bonnet variant going on with that, and I see them trying to do this as well, but instead of blue, it's purple for Halloween. Lionel, if I'm gonna be completely honest with you, make more O-scale Christmas stuff. I mean, I see you put a lot of time and effort into the Halloween stuff as well, but I feel like having an O-scale Christmas train is going to last more, or at least have more of an impact on sales and just, I guess, model railroading as a whole when compared to Halloween. You don't really see that many Halloween train sets. Now, if you want to try to change the norm and have, well, I don't know, model railroading as part of Halloween as much as it is Christmas, and I wish you all the best of luck. But model trains seem to be associated more with the Christmas season rather than Halloween. So I feel it will probably be better in the long term to make more detailed and O-scale Christmas models rather than Halloween. But like I said, that's not to say that the detail that's put into these engines is bad. You did a really good job on these engines. It's just that I'm not sure how many people would want them when compared to something like Christmas. But that's just my honest opinion on the matter. So we have the Midnight Flyer, pretty clever name as well. Again, I can see it going for I can see them basing these two engines on the D&H ALCO PA with a little bit of a warp on its scheme. You can kind of see the outline going on here, especially with the purple line going along the bottom. And interestingly, we have a very well-made J3A Hudson in terms of a Halloween engine. You see, now this puzzles me because, oh wait, it's a Line Chief Plus 2.0. Well, do they have a new mold for the Hudson? Because I recently purchased a J3A Hudson as a Line Chief Plus 2.0, but maybe it's because of the rendering, but I feel like the J3A Hudson, specifically for this one, looks a little bit different when compared to the Line Chief Plus 2.0 J3A Hudson of a year or two ago. I feel like this one has a little bit more detail put into it and looks a little bit closer to the real thing, especially when considering the number plates towards the headlights. So it's pretty interesting how a Halloween-based J3A looks a little bit more detailed when compared to previous J3As from Line Chief Plus. Again, it could just be me. It could just be due to the rendering, and I'm just not picking up these details. Most notably with the side rods, which are becoming a little bit more chunky towards the driver wheel over here. But it's just something I noticed down here. Once again, great job in terms of attention to detail for the J3A. The Line Chief Plus engines are looking pretty accurate to the real things too. Next we have a Halloween. Some more Halloween cars. Personalized boxcar for Halloween, that's cool. And then we go back to Legacy. What? I mean, I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it goes from Legacy Diesel to Halloween to Legacy Diesel again. I don't know why Halloween simply wasn't its own category, especially if we go back to the table of contents that we saw earlier. It looks like Halloween was just going to be its one-off thing towards the bottom, not going to be merged in the middle of Legacy Diesels. I mean, it's just that little fact that, I mean, the Legacy Diesels here are great, but I was just thrown off by Halloween being thrown in the middle for a second. So anyways, we have the Amtrak SW1, one of the oldest diesels currently on the Amtrak roster, as well as one of the oldest diesels in Phase 5. I think this is based out of the Wilmington? Either Wilmington or Beech Grove shops that still has the Amtrak SW1. Next we have Cargill number 62 over here. I think it's based on a steel mill. And I think there was also a experimental engine from Peoria Locomotive Works in the 90s that had an almost identical paint scheme to this and was recently covered in the SEPTA iceberg that I uploaded recently, since SEPTA leased a Peoria Locomotive Works similar to this livery. Other than that, we have the Dubuque Sand and Gravel. Once again, great job for Lionel for highlighting a lot of these smaller industrial railroads that had these switchers. Next, we have the Manufacturing Junction in a livery that looks pretty close to the Rock Island Rockets. Pretty cool, I must admit. The classic New York Central for the SW1, Lehigh Valley, pretty iconic in its own right, as well as Western Pacific, which I believe they have a Western Pacific SW1 in this livery, preserved somewhere near the Sacramento region. So, outstanding job once again on all these SW1s. Next, we have the SD40-2, an American classic. And in typical Lionel fashion, they take a classic model and release some lesser-known paint schemes for it. We have the classic CP Rail SD40-2, but this time it's in the dual flags livery, I think, where it's both the US and Canadian flags. We have the Aberdeen, Carolina, and Western. Not too often that you see a lot. Well, Lionel has been making a lot of their rolling stock lately. I think because the Lionel headquarters is located pretty close to the Aberdeen, Carolina, and Western. But it's not too often that you see models of the AC and W, especially of their SC40s, And for the Chicago Northwestern, we have a Falcon service variant of the SC40-2. Now, this I haven't heard of. So if someone could give a little bit of history on this engine, that would be appreciated as well. But again, it goes to show how Lionel takes a well-known engine class and tries to find lesser-known paint schemes to appeal to more audiences, to a more specific niche, to show, hey, we know about this livery too, here's your own model of it. And that is particularly cool of Lionel in the past few years. Now we have some more SC40-2s, this time representing the Reading and the Blue Mountain and Reading, which I think that was one of the Hertiage units, or one of their SC40-2s, that was painted into one of their original liveries that was released last year, I think. Because I remember briefly covering it for a Pennsy Fan periodical. Same thing also applies to the Susquehanna SC40-2 over here, paying homage to the original maroon and silver livery of the Susquehanna Railroad. Then we have what looks like an ordinary Sioux Line SC40-2. And then we also have NREX/VMV. Huh. Again, I haven't heard of this railroad, but its livery looks pretty cool, I must admit. There we go. Here are the legacy steam engines. Once again, I'm kind of thrown off by the order of the engines in this specific catalog, because usually it's legacy steam, then legacy diesel, O-gauge, and then Halloween and Christmas. But very unusual for Lionel to put in the steam engines after diesel, which was interrupted by the Halloween category. So maybe most of the Volume 2 catalog is O scale and not too much in terms of O gauge. Maybe that's why the order is different, but we'll just see when we get further along in the catalog. Here are the Y classes that were mentioned earlier. So let's see, we have the Y6B with 2174 along with 2194 with a more square smoke box. And then we have the 2188 and 2197 with a more circular smoke box. Pretty nice. Great way to give the Norfolk and Western some recognition, especially since the three preserved N&W steam engines have a pretty large fan base in their own right. Ooh, some more fantasy liveries. The Rio Grande fans are going to like what I'm about to say next. Attention, I know my channel is literally Pennsy fan, so I should theoretically know this stuff, but for the Pennsy did trial a bunch of Y6Bs from the N&W, or Y6Bs from the N&W at one point. So that begs the question, were they green? Because I noticed it with Lionel, they're applying a certain shade of Brunswick green on the engine, but I don't recall if they were painted from black to dark green going on black when they ran for the Pennsy. So, I mean, they have the lettering on the tender, but I don't know if they went all the way to the smoke box. So, somebody could answer that as well. That would be appreciated. Next, we have the Santa Fe. That makes sense because the Santa Fe had a lot of articulated power back in the day, although I'm not sure if it was directly from this N&W itself. Same thing goes for Great Northern, with a very nice combination of lighter green with black, as well as the Union Pacific, which doesn't have too much in terms of paint, but it's pretty close to other articulateds on the UP. Next, we have some, I guess, pretty early CGI renderings of some 482 mountains over here, because I think it's something having to do with the CGI rendering, in which it doesn't look as shiny as compared to these, essentially. But again, it's just a matter of, even if they're not fully complete, even if they won't be available for some time, Lionel still wants to put them on the list so they can get pre-orders going, and to just show that, hey, we've been thinking about these things, feel free to buy them. Because I think with Lionel, they make a handful of engines based on how many pre-orders are purchased, so if no pre-orders are placed, unfortunately they end up not building the engine. I could be wrong though, but other than that, let's see what mountains we have. I don't know too many of these steam engine classes offhand, so I'm not sure if they're entirely accurate to their real-life counterparts. But there's small details like the number plate on the Alaska one versus ATSF that gives me a little bit of hope. that Lionel knows what they're doing with this, especially with the tender for ATSF. I think that looks like it's an oil-fired one versus coal-fired for Alaska. But anyways, we have Alaska, Santa Fe, Seaboard with a nice color of light green and gray, along with NC and STL. And on the other page, we have New Haven with the Vanderbilt tender, Southern in a very nice crescent green livery, Tennessee Central, as well as Texas and Pacific. Great collection of engines, and I love the color with many of these steam engines. Up next, we have some more completed heavy Mikados, 282s. This is what I mean with the rendering, or at least with the models looking more complete, or more ready to go, ready to be shipped, ready to be built, when compared to the Mountains earlier. But from the Mikados, the heavy Mikados, we have the CNJ, USRA itself. Actually, no. Well, oh, that's interesting. I think these are all USRA heavy Mikados, but the EJ&E ones have EJ&E on the top of the tender, but US on the side. Maybe they were purchased secondhand from USRA, but I had to do more research into that. If any of you in the comments want to fill me in, that would be great too. We also have Great Northern in its iconic green, red, and black livery for steam engines. We also have the Louisville and Nashville, number 1776, New York Central, and the Sioux Line, number 1003, with, once again, pretty accurate headlight position. I really commend Lionel for getting these details right, because other toy train manufacturers, and I think at times even Lionel many years ago, would simply just use the same mold for Legacy and just change up the paint scheme, but it would still have other small details like this incorrect just for the sake of using the same mold. Lionel has since improved over the past few decades, so this way, especially with their Legacy engines, they give more attention to detail with railroad specifics. I think another company that does this well is Rapido Trains when it comes to HO scale models, where they add in these little details that certain railroads had to make them all the more accurate. And I definitely commend these model train companies for paying attention to detail. We definitely appreciate it. Up next, we have some 060s. I think I remember seeing these in a previous catalog or two, but I think they have more variety this time around, because this time we have Atlantic Coastline, Baltimore and Ohio, Chicago Northwestern, Grand Trunk, Nickel Plate, and Union Pacific. Nice to see some switchers getting some recognition as well. And I think these were also USRA, but I'm not entirely sure. Now we have some Legacy sets, along with a Mikado pulling 3 freight cars and a caboose, which is almost instantly dwarfed by the massive N&W King Cole with a Y6 pulling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 plus caboose. 12 cars plus a caboose. Quite the coal hauling set from the mighty coal hauling railroad, being pulled by a mighty coal hauling engine. After that, we have some more Legacy cabooses. Nice to see my home railroad, the Long Island, getting a little shout out as well. And I think with the lettering for this Conrail caboose, it looks like a very early era of Conrail. It looks closer to the Penn Central lettering than anything. Speaking of early lettering, we also have some early lettering for a Pennsy caboose down here, as well as a special by War Bonds caboose for Pennsy in the middle. Next, we have the Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Lines having their own caboose, as well as another Long Island Railroad caboose, this time painted in the Tichy livery, or Taichi, whatever it is. I'm not sure if any cabooses were painted in this specific livery, but it's definitely paying homage to a handful of sea liners and other diesels that are painted in this two-tone gray and orange paint scheme that's a little bit underrated on the island. And then we also have this thing. What's going on with this Penn Central caboose? It says Vision N5 cabin car, but there seems to be some sort of sticker in the middle. Maybe it has to do with radio frequencies. So, once again, great attention to detail with small things like that. We have some more box cars, which we'll be going through. Some more freight cars, tankers, hotbox box cars, some TOFC cars, ribside box cars. Again, if you want to take some more time to look at the freight cars, feel free to Pause the video. The Rio Grande one looks pretty cool. Some 3-bay hoppers. 3-bay hoppers. Now it looks like they're selling the coal itself for about $24. Not too bad. And then we have traditional O gauge, which mostly looks like it's going to be theme trains based on what's on the top row, especially in terms of rolling stock. Here's the Line Chief Universal Remote. I think this works on legacy engines too. I've used it on several legacy engines in the past. Yeah, it says legacy down here, so that's cool. I didn't know it also controls American Flyer. That's interesting. Starting off, we have some pretty nice J3A Hudsons. I feel like they slightly reworked the tooling on the J3A Hudsons because it looks much better when compared to the previous J3A Hudsons that have been in the last few catalogs. The wheels look more accurate, so do the side rods. There's a lot more tension on the boiler. And again, you also have the number plate being extended because you have I guess the original New York Central livery as indicated by the white stripes by the tender. And you also have a very interesting combination of the Dreyfuss Hudson livery on a Hudson. It looks great on the engine, by the way, as well as the Pacemaker freight car livery. Seeing how many Pacemaker box cars the Central had, it's really surprising that the Central didn't paint at least one of their steam engines into this livery. And then, of course, we have the classic Lionel Lines J3A Hudson, the Hudson that started it all. And dare I say, the Hudson that made the New York Central Hudson famous to begin with. Because this was Lionel's go-to steam engine back during the post-war era, where it would pull a lot of those maroon Lionel line heavyweight coaches that we saw earlier being pulled by the GG1. So great to see Lionel bringing this back and applying some great liveries on the Hudsons. And after that, we have some GP38s, starting off with the hydrogen-powered GP38 from CSX, number 2100. This is a great example of Lionel keeping up with the times. Even though it's the same mold for all these GP38s, they're still using liveries that are brand new, that were just released a few years ago. And not only that, but Lionel is also giving a little shout out to number 3084, which is the first Canadian Pacific Heritage unit. They applied it to a GP38 many years before they applied it to their SC70 ACUs. And then we also have the Ohio Central, Paducah and Louisville, and the Seaboard system. Great combination of liveries for a very great engine. And so we have our very first CPKC train set. And we also have a handful of intermodal cars that say both CP and CPKC. We are entering a new era of railroading where not only do we have new railroads and new liveries, but we also have new train sets to represent said liveries. All new products because it's an all-new railroad. But it still looks like you're using the same GEVO mold. I don't know if they're going to sell the engines separately as of yet. They might in the next year or two. But yeah, it's a pretty good combination. A lot of red, black, and yellow, as well as some occasional white. Very representative of your average CPKC or model train today. Although I also wonder how many CPKC engines are given this paint scheme, because I remember hearing about the 2 a few months ago, but I don't know how steady the repainting program has been going on since then. And then we have the Area 51 Railroad. I remember this was originally hauled by a GEVO as well, but now they swapped it out for a GP38. I guess it's a matter of keeping the theme present, but occasionally swapping up the consist to maybe try out different liveries on different types of rail cars. But I remember this first came out in the 2020 catalog as well as a little homage to the Area 51 visit of 2019. That was pretty viral. One of the best memes of 2019, as I heard. Then we have some more accessory cars for Area 51. Beetlejuice has its own box cars, fittingly placed next to the Area 51 cars because of the same shades of green. Next we have American History representing the Eads Bridge. Nice to see some local landmarks being recognized as well. This appears to be in St. Louis. Next, we have the Denver, South Park, and Pacific Railroad. I've never heard of them, but they look like a pretty interesting operation. And Roxy, the Long Island Railroad Dog. Wow, this is... As a Long Islander, I'm pretty honored for them to be recognizing Roxy, because before you had Dash and Dan, you had Roxy, which is basically a dog that was unfortunately abandoned by its owner, but it basically roamed from one IWR train to another every single day. And it was probably one of the first most well-known railroad mascots for its time, because this was pretty popular around the 1900s, 1910s. And not a lot of people know about Roxy outside of Long Island. So it's really nice to see Lionel giving recognition to a very early Long Island Railroad icon. On the other side, we have some Christmas cabooses, Lionel lines, and a trackside grill. Pretty clever, pretty impressive. Lionel Base 3, Lionel Capture Yap. I think they released this, maybe not in... Oh, this is O-Gauge. Yeah, this might be a callback to the Volume 1 catalog with the Chesapeake and Ohio Streamliner livery applied to their green rear engine. And this looks like a pretty nice set as well. Pretty good Southern Pacific. Yeah, Southern Pacific F3 with some coaches which don't look like they're 100% accurate to the real thing, but it's still nice to see a lesser known SP livery covered instead of just daylight orange. Another exclusive boxcar. And some more promotional stuff in the back. Make way for the GG1 Vision line. The GG1 was definitely the mold of the catalog. And with that said, we have reached the end of said catalog. Surprisingly, not a lot of O-Gauge and despite the cover, not a lot of Polar Express. In fact, I didn't see any Christmas trains whatsoever, despite being Volume 2. I mean, they included all of it in Volume 1, but I would think they would at least carry over some of the stuff from Volume 2, unless they figured that doing that would make it redundant when compared to Volume 1. But yeah, another thing too is that there weren't a lot of steam engines, but the GG1 was definitely the engine of focus for Volume 2. There were a lot of great diesel molds as well. Really confused by the Halloween section being placed in the middle of diesel. Maybe because it's PA and PA and it's the only Halloween engine. I mean, to be fair, they didn't really add too many Halloween trains when compared to previous issues. So I can kind of see why they put it in, just to be consistent with the mold, or at least with the class and necessary accessories. But yeah, it's a pretty good catalog overall. Once again, it's a matter of Lionel definitely improving when it comes to making catalogs. They just get better and better each year. So with that said, I don't even know if there's going to be a favorite steam because there were so few of them. Well, there were some of them over here, but favorite steam, I'm going to go with, let's see. Favorite steam engine of the catalog is, my guess is probably going to be, I'm going to go for Sioux Line 1003. Amazing attention to detail, especially with the front light. Honorable mention will be the Lion Chief Hudson's that they recently introduced. And favorite diesel, it's a pretty tough choice because they included a lot of good diesels in here too. Just going through some of these pages pretty quickly. But favorite diesel, I'm going to give it to, let's see. This may come as a surprise to some, but despite all the emphasis placed on the PAs, and again, this is based on my opinion, I'm going to give my favorite diesel to the Manufacturers Junction SW1. I mean, I need to do some more research on this railway because the way this lines up, it looks like a Rock Island Rockets SW1, and that is particularly cool. You don't see the Rock On Rockets livery is a very incredible paint scheme to begin with, and you don't see it on engines other than E units too often. So great job by recognizing a small railroad, especially a smaller railroad with a very, very cool livery. So with that said, it is a little past 1:30 in the morning at the time of recording, but we did it. We got the catalog in. Thank you all so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video and other ones like it, feel free to like and subscribe for more. Have a good day.